So you're trading ICT, you're trying to apply the concepts I teach, but you find yourself constantly struggling to keep up with the 1 minute chart. Or maybe you understand the models, but you're still looking for a cleaner way to frame your higher time frame bias and narrative. What if I told you that the first presented fair value gap is not limited to the 1 minute chart? In this video, I'm going to show you how that same concept can be applied on a higher time frame, not just to find trade ideas, but to structure your bias, your narrative, and your expectations for price. And if you've been feeling like everything moves way too fast on the lower time frames, this will simplify the way you look at the market. And without further ado, let's get into it. The first presented fair value gap model I teach is a simple framework that follows algorithmic time and price in line with ICT guidelines. The model itself is very simple yet highly efficient and easy to execute. You wait for the first presented fair value gap after 9:30 to present itself on the 1 minute chart. You extend it to the right and allow price to move away from it. On the return back into the gap, you want to see price fail to close below it in a bullish scenario or above it in a bearish scenario, followed by a new displacement away from the gap. That new displacement or fair value gap becomes the basis for your entry. Your stop loss is placed below the low formed on the return into the first presented fair value gap, and your target is the most logical near-term pool of liquidity. This model is especially effective around macro times where price often moves cleanly and decisively in one direction. So the concept itself is exactly the same as it is on the 1 minute chart. You simply move to the 15-minute chart, identify the first presented fair value gap after 9:30, and treat it the same way you would the first presented gap on the 1 minute time frame. So here we are looking at the 15-minute chart on Nasdaq, moving from Tuesday, January 13th into Wednesday, January 14th. I've marked the first presented fair value gap that forms after 9:30 on Tuesday. And as we moved into Wednesday, you can see price trading back into that gap overnight during Asia session, failing to close above it and then displacing lower once again. Now that initial displacement to the downside was too small, and more importantly, there were relative equal highs above that remained unswept. For that reason, I'm ignoring that fair value gap. Instead, I wait for price to return back into the first presented gap, sweep those relative equal highs, and then displace lower again. That second displacement is now meaningful enough to confirm my bearish bias. Unfortunately, that displacement also formed a balanced price range, which meant price had no real incentive to trade back into that CB and offer an entry. Instead, price continued to melt lower and eventually left behind a much larger CB below. That larger CB now becomes the basis for a bearish bias going into New York AM session. Price trades back into it, and once 9:30 hits, it begins to melt rapidly. And this is how you see the same concept repeat itself across every time frame over and over again. The time frame doesn't change the logic. The reason the first presented fair value gap is so important is because it represents the true value of price for that day or for that session. And as a result, price naturally seeks to trade back into it where it often finds support or resistance. And that's why this concept works, and that's why this model is so effective. And if we go back and mark out the sessions on the chart, you can see how this concept plays out relative to the session kill zones. The New York afternoon session sweeps New York AM lows and sends price back into the first presented fair value gap. Asia then forms relative equal highs within that first presented gap, sweeps them, and displaces price lower. And as we move into London, price retraces back into Asia lows before melting below the New York afternoon session's lows. New York AM then sends price back into that London CB we discussed earlier before pushing price even lower. So you can see how the time and price work together in perfect symbiosis to deliver price into logical pools of liquidity. And in conclusion, the time frame itself is not what's important. Price is fractal, and these same concepts apply across every time frame. The only difference is how long it takes for price to do what it's already programmed to do. Choose the time frame that best fits your style, apply the concepts we've covered, and you'll begin to see meaningful improvement in your results. As always, thank you for watching, guys. I hope you found this helpful and that the content is genuinely improving the way you look at the market. And if it did help, please make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. And I'll see you in the next one.